Thank you very much for attending this evening's Dunbar Dyson Beck Renaissance Master of Poverty Ridge program with Bruce Marwick. I'm Mary Ellen Burns from the Renaissance Society, one of the sponsors for today. And I just wanted everyone to know it's an organization that has been around since 1986. It was originally set up for retired folks, but now in this virtual world, we are definitely inviting people in that are just intellectually curious adults. We have other virtual programs besides this one. Tonight, there are about 24 programs that are open to everyone in the community and in partnership with organizations that like SADS, which Bruce is going to talk about. I'm going to put my email into the chat so that if anybody wants to get on our mailing list for that, they can. Bruce, go.
All righty. Well, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited about this presentation. And as we go through it, you will realize that it's not just a fascinating story, but I've actually had some personal touch points with the story over 25 years. But before I get into it, I will share about the Art Deco Society. Similar to Renaissance, we've been around almost, well, actually, gosh, just reflected 30 years. The Art Deco Society was founded in 1991. We are a nonprofit. Under normal circumstances, we have walking tours, we have events, live lectures. We occasionally will do day trips. And we've, like so many organizations, have gone online. But hopefully at some point you can look at our website, and I will mention it also at the end of the event, and find out what we do and how we do it. I will begin with Dunbar Dyson Beck. I actually, this was a fascinating research project for myself, because typically I've been doing these projects for about 10 years. I'll generally take one project per year. But this one was more challenging because generally I reach into a local archive like the State Library or the State Archives, and they will have materials that I can readily use. I can go in there and touch it and smell it and feel it and take photographs of it. But this time it was all remote. That was the first challenge. The second challenge is Dunbar Dyson Beck passed away in 1986. And over the years, his materials have kind of gone to different collectors, different owners. And so for the last 40 years, his materials, his artwork have kind of gone to all different corners of the country. And my challenge to myself was, because I'm very passionate about attribution, giving credit to the people who have it. I didn't want to just grab things off the internet. So,
Bruce, for some reason, we are seeing your Zoom instead of your regular share screen. We have Susan McClatchy's screen.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop the screen and you're going to have to start over.
Okay, that's fine. So I am in, I can still see my notes mode. So can you see my Dunbar?
No, we have nothing. We are no longer in share view. For some reason, somebody else.
Should I end slideshow and begin?
You're not even, you're not in share view. So you need to go into share view.
Gotcha. We will do that.
And I will ask everybody again to turn off your audio and video for now. Thank you. And now we're in your notes view, so we just need you to start from the beginning.
Okay.
That's it.
Are we good?
Yep, we're good.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary Ellen. So I was just explaining the challenges and giving appropriate attribution to all of the organizations. And these are some of the organizations I reached out to. And without their support, as I mentioned, doing this remotely, I would have, in some cases, Zoom meetings with archivists, and we'd literally sit there and go through materials, sharing them in the the video camera realm. Some cases it was just a lot of dialogue via phone and sharing materials via email. So I just want to give a shout out to all of these institutions because they're of great help. And I'm just going to run through them: the Sacramento Public Library Sacramento Room, the Center for Sacramento History, which I'm passionate about because I'm on their board, the Crocker Art Museum, the Diocese of Sacramento, they have an archives department. Historic Resource Associates, they're an organization that is actually doing a review of the Bee property at 21st and Q. Holy Spirit Church, Nevada Museum of Art, and then another exceptional, if you like WPA era, anything, I highly recommend the Living New Deal department, or the Living New Deal .org. Actually, I think it's .com. They have a robust Wikipedia type page for WPA projects. And then very special thanks to two galleries that were willing to share materials that they have. In both cases, a lot of studies and preparatory work that Beck actually did. These both Renaissance Man Antiques and Schubert Aid Music and Arts both have really good collections of artifacts that you might want to look at after this presentation. So I always like at the beginning of these presentations, just give a kind of a little framework as to the people or group I'm talking about. And in this case, I'm going to just do some highlights of Dunbar Beck's life. He was a Midwesterner, born in Delaware, Ohio in 1902. One of the things I wasn't able to really dive into was his life up until he went to college, and he went to multiple colleges, and he had quite a lauded career, topped off by a master's degree in art from Yale University in 1926. He then went on to win a very prestigious art competition, the Prix de Rome, that allowed him to get a scholarship to the American University in Rome for 3 years, full scholarship. And then this is what I wasn't able to make the determination of the first touch point between Eleanor McClatchy and Dunbar Beck, but I have a suspicion it was when Beck was commissioned by Eleanor McClatchy and her sister Charlotte McClatchy Maloney in 1933 to paint a series of paintings for the Stations of the Cross as a memorial to their brother Carlos McClatchy. And finally, which is probably most important for us Sacramentans, Beck moved to Sacramento permanently, highly based on his relationship and projects he had done with Eleanor McClatchy in the early 1940s. This is the kind of the last bullet slide of the presentation, but I've kind of did a linear approach to this presentation, and I identified really 6 areas that Beck was exceptional in, and I'm just going to run through them, and then the whole presentation will kind of follow suit with this lineup of talents. First off, he was classically trained painter. While I truly love Art Deco, and the WPA era is considered a part, for all intents and purposes, Beck was really a classical artist. I mean, his style and his approach was really looking, back to previous generations of inspiration rather than the modern 20th century movements that were happening between, let's say, 1920 and 1940. He was an art professor. He was very respected for his ability to do drawings, his understanding of anatomy, the human form. And so prior to him coming to Sacramento, when he lived in New York, he taught at multiple institutions, including Columbia, Cooper's Union. For the Deco people, he did do New Deal projects, and he did some murals for the 1939 World's Fair. And then the next three are really his time in Sacramento. He came to Sacramento during World War II, and he really changed directions and did a whole different set of types of projects. He became kind of the major theater set and costume designer for the Sacramento Civic Repertory Theater. He was very involved with the buildings associated with the Bee, as well as the continued development of the Sacramento Civic Repertory. And then, much to my surprise, he was very active with early preservationists for the saving of old Sacramento, to make sure that the freeway didn't physically go right through Front Street and was moved back a couple of blocks to Third. So that was a kind of a really wonderful insight that I had not known prior to starting this project. In this presentation, I also wanted to acknowledge Eleanor McClatchy. She was Beck's main kind of patron and sponsor. And part of that story is just how strong a friendship they had for each other. Beck ultimately, when he got to Sacramento, ended up living around the corner from Eleanor. They worked on multiple projects together. I mentioned some of the Bee buildings. And so as I go through these different time periods of Beck's life, I will kind of acknowledge and try to, kind of honor the interchange between these two important Sacramentans, because I think in many cases, the projects they work on there was cross-pollination of ideas, and I think many of them were really very successful. Now, this first section is really about my initial being exposed to Beck. And I call this Salome and her companions hidden away in a drawer, because that's literally how I was first exposed to Dunbar Beck. In the late 90s, I was the sales and account manager for Raquella Company in Sacramento, and Bob Raquella Company's owner, had a cache of mostly drawings, but he had this terrific study. I don't believe this is the final, although it's beautiful, study about 14 by 10 on canvas painting of Salome. And I was just kind of blown away by it. I think Bob Raquella had shared it with me because he knew my interest even then in Art Deco. And I just thought, wow, this is just a terrific piece, historical document from the period. And Bob had acquired these and held on to them for many years. Now, that kind of got me going and thinking about Beck, and I kind of shelved the idea. But then the concept of doing a Beck presentation came back in, because I had an opportunity to get some of the companions from that drawer. These were a group of drawings that I acquired about 5 years ago out of Witherell's auction house. And what attracted me to this grouping was, the main figure in the middle is classic Beck. It shows his, high technique, his almost photorealism drawing ability. But what caught my attention in this group were the 8 drawings, 4 on the left, 4 on the right, from what was obviously some sort of mural, maybe stained glass series, definitely I would think from the WPA era, and they each correspond to some part of weather. There's a flood, there's lightning, and I just thought that is the coolest thing. And that kind of got me reconnected with the idea of, boy, I need to investigate Beck, his art and his time in Sacramento. When I was with Bob Raquella, Bob some of you may know is also was a passionate preservationist. He's restored personally several Victorians in Midtown. He was on design review board for several years. And so he kind of told me some of the history about Poverty Ridge. Our offices were actually at 19th and V, so we were relatively close. And I think he had shared with me early on that he understood that Beck lived in this house on the corner of 22nd and Q. And I was also blown away by the house because it's a wonderful prairie style. Subsequent to those years with Bob, I learned that it was done by a very well-known Sacramento architect, Rudolph Harold, and that Harold had done important buildings in Sacramento, like our original City Hall. So I thought, wow, that was an appropriate house for Beck to be in. And then I eventually learned that actually the house was associated with Eleanor McClatchy, that she had actually originally, I think, created it as almost an artist's residence facility. So it's a beautiful house, well maintained, and I just think it's terrific that it's associated with Beck. Another thing that I came to discover is, as I reached out to people to investigate Beck and what kind of person and personality he had, 3 different gentlemen remembered Beck having an exotic car, but they couldn't remember which car it was. And the 3 cars mentioned was maybe a Jaguar, maybe an Aston Martin, or maybe a Maserati. And I thought, well, regardless of what it was, I think the Maserati was determined to be black. It showed that, Beck had style and liked style, and that would make quite a mark on Poverty Ridge, particularly if this was back in the late 70s or early 80s. Also, when I began my investigation or do any investigation, I look at, can I find some bios or exposés? Unfortunately, no major biography has been done of Beck. So one of the areas I look for is just comments, there are several terrific biographies and histories of the McClatchy, C.K. McClatchy, the history of McClatchy Company, but with only small references to Beck. But I looked everywhere, and I found this actually in a Chamber of Commerce magazine for 46. And, it's just one little piece of trying to put together the puzzle of Dunbar Beck. And I got kind of a kick out of the definition, or the opinion of Davidson King. He said, Mr. Beck, in marked contrast to Vincent van Gogh, is quite well adjusted to life and is able to do any number of things in addition to painting. And to see Mr. Beck's work does not suffer in comparison with Van Gogh. So, everything has to be taken with a grain of salt, but at least this person thought that Beck was versatile and had a pretty good attitude in comparison to, someone like, even at that time, Van Gogh was known as quite of an eccentric. And then another 2 of my really favorite discoveries were these 2 portraits done by a very respected New York City portrait house known for doing photographs of artists in New York. And the photo studio was Peter A. Julian's son. They have a terrific collection. A lot of it is online, but they did both the cover shot as well as this one, which will show up in some interesting advertising pieces later in the presentation. So my first section is going to be his academic years. And as I mentioned, I don't know much about Beck's early years, but what I do know is he had a very lauded university and college career. And my guess is that when people saw his exceptional talent, they kept encouraging him to go further. He started at the college in his own hometown of Delaware, Ohio. He then moved on to Northwestern in Chicago, Northwestern University, got what I understand it was a BFA undergrad, then went on to New Haven to get his graduate degree at Yale. And then of course, this prestigious success of winning the Prix de Rome. And to kind of get an appreciation, the Prix de Rome awarded him an $8,000 scholarship for 3 years. That doesn't sound like a lot of money, but I just did the multiplier. It was, by today's standard, $120,000 in 2021 dollars. I could find very, very few paintings of Beck, either college or prior to him going to Rome. But I did find this one painting. It was in an auction catalog from 2011. And it kind of shows that he was a Renaissance painter in the 20th century. This is where this was his center of focus, at least at that moment in time. This painting was Allegory of Charity, and Beck was obviously fascinated with that time period, and because he was well versed in doing the human form, he could pull it off. Another was that, Beck did lots and lots of preparation drawings, and if you go out there in the catalog world and do research, I know the Crocker, because I investigated the Crocker Art Museum, they have about 30 drawings of Beck's. So he would do tremendous preparation for his work. I thought it was appropriate to show because, I was less knowledgeable than I probably should have been about the American Academy in Rome. The American Academy, and this is the actual building and campus area, was actually built in the late 19th century by certain universities in America, successful architects and artists who felt that Americans needed more preparation and informal training of the classics by and large. This, of course, was the Beaux-Arts period, and it was a way in which to really, and this included architects, to prepare them for their professional careers in America. Beck apparently really took full advantage of his experience there. He actually also did a lot. I saw some journal entries of him doing different tours of Europe. He also went to North Africa and to Tunis. And that was fascinating to me because at the end of this presentation, I think I'm going to show some items that may have been helpful in the inspiration for some work on some terrific decorative art pieces he did that are here in Sacramento. So Beck was in Rome for 3 years. Scholarship ended and he decided and planned to come home. He came home on this specific boat, the Berengaria. This was actually at the time the flagship of the Cunard line prior to the Queen Elizabeth. And I just can't imagine the kind of intrepidation that he probably had coming home. Here he had all this tremendous art degrees and experience behind him, but he's coming home to America during the Great Depression. The Depression, of course, has been active for a year. He came home in, I believe, in August of 1930, and he really didn't know, what his future would hold, I'm sure. Then I found one of the just great little research pieces for this project. This is a catalog page, or actually a review of a show that Beck did in 1931 in New York City at the 56th Street Galleries. And it has 3 pieces, all of which that I'm going to talk about. And one of the challenges, as I mentioned, was, under pandemic scenario, how do you even find the research materials to move this forward? And this is one of the pieces I found that really inspired me, because the first thing it did, it explained to me this wonderful portrait I now knew the name of the painting, and I also had a feel for how large the painting was. The painting's actually, his name was Primavera, and as it was probably inspired by his time in Europe. You know, it reminds me of kind of that classic peasant vision of old Europe. Very handsome painting. I think the only thing that then I was hungry for is, gosh, what is the coloring of this? You know, what does this look like in color? We are so used to having color at our beck and call now, and the thought that I can't see it in color. But in this article, it describes the three paintings shown on this page, but it also says that in the mix of the show was Salome. So then I got excited because the Salome I know is just a study 14 inches wide, and looking at Beck in front of this larger painting, gosh, I would love to see the Salome at 4 feet wide. It'd be very dramatic. So I've told you a little bit about Beck's early career. This is a later portrait by Beck, but I'm putting it here because it begins to tell the story of how I think Beck connected with Eleanor McClatchy in the early 30s. And now I know Eleanor had spent time in New York City. There's even a possibility that she visited and saw the show of Beck's in 1931 in Manhattan, but I don't know that for sure. But what I do know is that tragically, Eleanor's brother, Carlos McClatchy, died of influenza in January of 1933. And it was a tremendous loss for the family because C.K. McClatchy, Eleanor's and Carlos's father, was a mature man at this point. There was concerns about C.K.'s health. And it was just devastating, I know, for the entire family to lose Carlos. What transpired then was that Eleanor and her sister, Charlotte McClatchy Maloney, decided that they wanted to do some for Carlos a memorial. And they decided to commission Beck to do a series of paintings, the Stations of the Cross, and specifically to do them for this, in the background, this specific church, which is in Sacramento. And this is Rose Chapel on Franklin Boulevard at the time, St. Patrick's Orphanage. It's now St. Patrick's Academy. And as I kind of dug deeper into it, it seemed like this is probably the touch point for how Eleanor met Beck. This is an actual article header from the Sac Bee, October 24th, 1933, telling the story of these paintings that have been commissioned. And interestingly enough, and I don't have the background story, but prior to the paintings being, I'm assuming the paintings were painted in New York City, brought out, prior to them being installed at Rose Chapel in Sacramento, they actually had an exhibition of the paintings at Gump's Gallery in San Francisco. And I thought, you know, knowing the history of Gump's as an institution, I just thought that was a very intriguing story in and of itself. But then the question is, you know, how quickly can I get down to see the paintings? And of course, we're under a pandemic scenario again. So once again, getting into different facilities to shoot these was part of both the challenge and the joy of putting this presentation together. So here we have actually one of the paintings. This is titled Jesus Meets His Mother. And some of the interesting things that I realized when I actually got on scene and had an opportunity to photograph the paintings is that sadly, the paintings are shown in not the best situation. They're high on the wall, I believe for security purposes, which makes sense, but there's no direct lighting. There's some older original candelabras, which are very handsome, but they're unlit. There's just some individual bulb spotlights. So I'm only going to show a couple of the paintings, partly because the photos I got didn't do the paintings justice. I think the paintings probably need a good cleaning, as well as the varnish is probably yellowed quite significantly. So I hope at some point the diocese has an opportunity to do some curatorial work on these paintings. Another lovely painting is this one. Jesus is Stripped is the title. And another interesting feature of these paintings, they are roughly 18 by 24 high, is that they were all painted on aluminum. And I'm assuming to give it some sort of translucent quality. I can say with some confidence, having seen them, that sadly they're not getting that translucence now. The two photos I've just shown you, I did lighten to try to honor probably a better representation of the coloring. And you may ask, well, how do you know you're going the right direction? Well, we do have some other terrific examples in town that have been cared for and are pretty sparkly, actually. Much to my surprise, I found out that there were 3 additional paintings by Beck in the Holy Spirit Church on Lion Park Drive. This is actually the altar of the church. The 2 paintings on left and right were actually done by Beck in 1942. And I've included them in this section because they're really, I think, that I could find the last time Beck did a liturgical type of art here or even outside of Sacramento. The paintings have these wonderful niches, which I think really enhance them when you're looking at the paintings. But once again, you can see, like a classic Renaissance artist, tremendous chiaroscuro, the light and dark, the shades, his ability to show the human form. This is Our Lady of Perpetual Help. As I've been explained to me, Beck was actually picking up on some iconic imagery that in this particular case, the child has been scared and runs and is held, and that's why his sandal is falling off his foot. And I thought is a very, very touching story. So this will kind of end Beck's period of early 1930s and his liturgical art. And then we're going to go into the next series, which is Beck in the late 30s. And this is when he did his WPA murals. And then another terrific discovery. He had involvement in a terrific Steinway piano. In 1935, prior to some of the other things I had discovered early on, I found this competition that Beck had been involved with. He did a mural for a corporate office in Manhattan, and it had been written up in this publication, Literary Digest, which was kind of an important publication, almost kind of like a Time magazine. And I don't think it made it out of the Depression, the magazine. But I thought, well, every time you find something new associated with a project, it gets exciting, particularly if you've never heard it about. The first thing that struck me when I saw the article was, I definitely recognized, well, boy, the figure on the right looks like Beck, but the fantastic streamline transportation mural on the left just didn't look like Beck to me. And so that became one of the questions of, is this really a Beck mural? And then when I read the article, I realized there were 3 other second place winners. Beck did win the prize to do the main mural. And I think the reason he got the prize was that he took a very kind of historical approach to the involvement and the basically history of how labels, and of course in ancient times it would have been cunographs and clay tablets, but you know, there's a real education quality to the mural. But then I was shared this color sample or color study, and it's basically Beck, what he had done was, and it's definitely from the mural, is he had drawn the figures on tin foil. And all I could think of was that the intent was to draw the figures on a metallic surface so that it would reflect the room and that would give, you know, particularly if it had a satin finish, it would give it color and lighting impacted by the environment that the mural was in. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I would have never imagined that looking at a black and white photo, but I had the opportunity to acknowledge that because of this tinfoil sample. Beck also did WPA, and this is one of the notable ones. It's in Danvers Post Office, Massachusetts. This is a photograph from that national site I was telling you, Living New Deal. And, you know, it's a very, I'd almost call it a traditional approach to telling storytelling. It looks very illustrative rather than fine art as a mural. It's telling the story of Thomas Pickering, who was a notable Revolutionary era politician, adjutant general of the colonial Washington's army. And it's depicting him, you know, coming home to the family, you know, after conflict. What amazed me was when I saw examples that showed test studies for this exact location. Oh, I might mention that I do like when murals are dated. This one was dated 39 by Beck. This is one of the studies, and I thought, wow, this is way more dramatic. Once again, I love the chiaroscuro, the dark and light. I love the storytelling. You know, it's almost like 2 or 3 different scenarios melded together. And I kind of picked my brain is that the selection committee for the WPA for Massachusetts or Danvers, Mass, why they chose that over what they selected, I'm not really sure. But for my way of thinking, this is a much more dramatic piece. And then there's the second rendition, also terrific. It's just, it's kind of interesting to see also the level of finish that Beck would do on his studies. He typically did larger studies. If my memory serves me, this is in the 24 to 26 inches wide. And I also just personally almost like some of his studies better than his final work, because a lot of his final work was almost formal. There's a certain kind of spontaneity I find in a lot of his studies. And then probably the most unique project Beck did during this period was he was invited by Steinway to do decorative designs on a piano that was going to be in the White House. And wow, what a terrific opportunity. And Beck, of course, doing the human form and loving allegorical themes, that's how he approached the project. So I'm going to show you several studies for either the top of the piano. I don't think there was a design on the top of the piano, but there was a different location maybe for this integrated or complex grouping of figures. This one is a bit based on a Walt Whitman poem, Come Muse, Migrate. There was actually words of the poem integrated into the design. Orpheus over the globe, kind of more of an allegorical theme. And what's interesting seeing these, which are, as I mentioned, very allegorical, it turned out that some of the major pieces for this piano were actually tied to classic themes of America, dance, and music. And this is an example. The concept was that Beck was going to do some sort of gold leaf treatment of groupings of figures tied to music and dance on the side of the piano casing. And it ended up that 5 subjects or groups were selected. And what's exciting about this piece is that this was actually a test paint on a piece of wood. I'm assuming a sample wood from Steinway. The piece of wood is actually stamped. If you zoom in, it says Steinway in the black lettering in the upper left-hand corner. And that's just a wonderful little piece of history of art development for a notable art piece. Once again, Beck did many, many drawings. When he was doing his figures, he, obviously very carefully, created the human form before he, actually started painting in, muscles. This was one of the groups for Native Americans. Here's an evolutionary sketch. You can see also, and I can relate to this, that my time as a graphic designer, because that's how I started my career, was using what they used to call tissue. Generally, it was a thin vellum. And you can see that while it's a terrific drawing, the condition of vellum over 100 years or 80 years, you have to be very careful with the material as it matures. And then we actually have the 5 final examples of groupings. Cowboy ballads, a group doing the Virginia Reel folk dance, work songs, a barn dance, and a ceremonial dance. And this is really, I couldn't find an exceptionally clear picture, but it gives a good idea of the groupings. But here, and you can actually go to, and I'm just going to acknowledge many of these pieces are coming from Schubert Ad Music and Arts, is that they also have this wonderful piece that I feel there needs to be a little bit more investigation. And that is because this is a 1947 letter from Steinway to Beck, letting them know that the piano has been brought back to the factory for repairs, and that Steinway is concerned about, because the figures look like they're holding up well, as over 10 years or 15 years in the White House, people have been rubbing up against the piano and just wear and tear. Just finding out about Beck's availability to come back and potentially repair these figures in the future. What excited me, though, was this is the only picture I've seen of the complex group of figures basically integrated as the stand for the lifting of the hood of the piano. And I don't know if that was ever done. I'm assuming this is a marketing or a advertising photo. So I don't know if this was a mock-up or actually done, because I've never seen the actual piano with the hood up and that piece in place. Out of the same grouping is this exciting, just a marketing piece. But here, lo and behold, in the middle, we see Beck honored and acknowledged, but there's this wonderful promotional portrait of him. So it's good to see how the portrait was actually used. And then this is a more recent photo of the piano showing the figures. Another artist, just because of the Deco Society, another noted artist, which of course my memory's escaping me, did these wonderful heroic modern eagles as the footers for the legs of the piano. Another grand project that Beck worked on is he worked on murals for this building, which was actually the business building at the 39 World's Fair. The location of the building was very close to the Trilon, the dramatic buildings at the center of the fair. Highlighted in gray, just so you could see it. It's not a surprise that Beck was selected for this particular building, because being a truly Renaissance classic painter, it would be very appropriate to do his style for this classic themed modern building. One of the murals he came up with was a heroic figure that represents business administration with multiple arms, conducting and keeping the arms of business going. To his left and right are multiple factories. On looking at the figure on the right is actually an ocean liner. It's hard to see. And on the left is a streamlined train. So, kind of honoring this power of business administration in modern business. And this is a terrific photo. This is from the New York Public Library, actually showing Beck up on the scaffolding. And, sometimes I'm always amazed when I look at World's Fair, particularly like the 1939 in San Francisco and the 39 in New York, is just kind of the heroic size of some of this stuff and how many artists were put to work. It's just kind of mind-blowing in a way. This is a photo actually off of a postcard that I have that you can get a better sense of the scale. You can't see all the factories to the left and right, but it gives you, a good feel for how it fit in. And I understand that he also did some of the textures. If you see the kind of little wavy treatment at the top above the figure, keep that in mind, because what I'm going to share at the end in terms of some decorative arts that Beck worked on, I think you're going to realize that many things that he did through his career then reappeared later on. That would also be true of this one. On the entrance of that postcard I showed you earlier on the walls, Beck did two heroic murals. This one was on the left. I do not know what the actual title of this was, but I've only seen this particular one was able to see in color. As I've mentioned, not all of them of the art I've seen of Beck's have I ever seen in color, but I was able to at least identify what was on the right side of the entrance in black and white. And that would be this, which is actually, I think, just a photograph of the actual presentation drawings at the New York Public Library. This is one of my favorite pieces of everything I've discovered about Beck. I will, acknowledge Renaissance Man Antiques for sharing many of the studies that I've shared in this section. And this is just a real favorite, because it's not just a single piece, it's actually a triptych. One of the things I'm trying to discover is, was this ever done? The location, Not sure if it was or if it was a study. I'm sure, like so many artists, Beck was doing things in competition and trying to stay alive during the Depression. What I do know is I've seen in photograph form, particularly the left and side panels as studies. Once again, Beck worked large, and they're just terrific. Particularly the strike one on the right is just very striking. And I'm just pleased that I'm able to share it. I'm also going to show you during this time one of the ways that Beck kept active, financially surviving, was to do portraits. He did many, many portraits. Very handsome, and they were men and women. And I think sometimes they were probably done for all different types of purposes, gifts, maybe commissions. This one I think very kind of exemplary of the era. Unfortunately, I see that it has quite a few nicks and damage to the background, but I think it's a very handsome piece. And then this next one is actually, Beck would also work sometimes just in charcoal and almost to a level of photorealism. This is actually a charcoal sketch of C.K. McClatchy. I believe it was probably done after his passing. C.K. passed away in 1936. And at this point, I'm going to kind of shift gears because I'm going to now talk about, after that initial contact between Beck and Eleanor McClatchy in 1933, I don't really know any, I haven't been able to verify what level of connection, if they were sent letters back and forth, how it proceeded. I can say that, Eleanor, up until 1936, had aspired to be a playwright. She had spent several years in New York, actually did some coursework at Columbia University in 1935. It was her intent to follow her dream and pursue that career. But with the passing of her brother in 1933 and then the passing of C.K. in 1936, Eleanor was in a unique situation in that the McClatchy family was looking to her to lead the family forward. And as part of that, in 1936, the newspapers announced that the papers would be led by Eleanor and the hand-picked editor by C.K. Walter P. Jones. Now, I will say that C.K. knew that he was in ill health for almost a year, and he had reached out to Eleanor in February. C.K. passed away, I believe, in April of that year, 36, and really said, we are really looking to you, Eleanor, to take this on, that we know that this is not your favorite thing to do by any measure, but there might be a next generation down the line, but right now we need your leadership. We need your engagement in the family business. So at that same time, the Bee announced Miss Eleanor McClatchy will take over the direction of the Bees of Sacramento, Fresno, Modesto, and 5 radio stations. And my impression at that point was that, Eleanor was a very talented, creative person. She had had some difficult times. She had an unsuccessful marriage in her 20s, and she was really trying to reinvent herself, and probably not in the newspaper business, but she did love the arts, including theater and playwriting. And she chose to put that aside and lead the family. And I think this next photo says a lot about that commitment. This photo is from 1938. It's quite intriguing, I think, because on the left are the McClatchys and on the right are either business interests in Sacramento or the administrative leaders of the Bee. And what hit me right off was, boy, look, yeah, all the leaders on the right are all male, and Eleanor is in front of the family. And both the family and the business interests, to a certain extent, are on her shoulders. To help identify this group, here are, and hopefully you can name, the important one is Eleanor is in the left front with a hat on. I will point out Walter P. Jones, who I just shared. He's in the middle of the business group. And then the other three I'd like to point out, behind her are her sister, sister-in-law, her sister's sons, but the other three people I'd really like to mention is James McClatchy, William Ellery McClatchy, and C.K. McClatchy, or the second generation C.K. That the expectations was that some point in time, those young men would become the leaders of the McClatchy newspapers, and in the case of James and CK, they did, but many decades down the line. So that gives you kind of Eleanor came back to Sacramento. At the time, I believe she was actually in Pasadena and not New York. I just learned that here recently. And committed to running and becoming a newspaper woman. But in the face of that, I think she also made a commitment that if I'm going to make a life in Sacramento, I need to surround myself with, when I'm not working, with the things I love, which would include art and theater. And part of it was the philanthropic part of that activity. So now I'm going to talk about the areas in which she engaged in passions, and she engaged in those passions many times with Dunbar Beck. So a love of stage. Eleanor McClatchy had been involved in theater, something called the Community Players in the 30s and 40s. And then in the mid 40s, this new institution came in, and it was the Sacramento Civic Repertory Theater. And I've got to believe Dunbar had some impact on that, because it was just around the time that he moved permanently to Sacramento. And one of the other things is it's very rare, both Beck and Eleanor were, didn't seek out the stage. What they enjoyed about theater was being in the background. And they did enjoy that. So I'm going to give you just a couple of photos of that. Here are two wonderful photos I found at the Center for Sacramento History. In both cases, and this is very rare to see pictures of Eleanor, in both cases, she is happily, particularly on the left, I love her expression. She obviously is enjoying this, doing makeup, either for the Civic Theater or on the right. In the case of the right was a group called the KFBK Players. KFBK was the radio station owned by the Bee. And I love the expression in the sepia tone photo of the gentleman near the mirror looking back with almost some surprise that Eleanor is in the room and participating. And then about a decade later, also rare to find pictures, although he was very active as the art director at the Civic Theater, Repertory Theater, was Beck. He would do set designs, he would do models of sets. In a couple slides I'm going to show, he did a very intricate mock-up of this set for a play called Time Remembered. And here he's actually doing a mock-up of a full-size Model T era taxi. One of the things that really made this presentation possible was the access to the Sacramento Bee. And I accessed it through the Sacramento Public Library, which is a treasure. This is the first time I saw Beck acknowledged as participating in a play or play activity or design in Sacramento. And it was a play called Naughty Not that takes place at Yale University in 00. It's not for 2000, it's for 1900. And I'm sure Beck got a kick out of it because of his own affiliation with Yale. But some of the surprising things about this is it's really hard to tell. They photographed it so close to the background, it's really hard to tell how it worked as a stage set, although it's a very interesting paint. But what I do know is two interesting things about this. This play was really created for the burgeoning population of troops in Sacramento because of the bases here. And secondly, it was held in a wooden theater in Southside Park. And all I can think of is that I know in 1939, they had a Roaring 49 tribute. They built a whole little Western town in Southside Park. All I could think of is that whatever theater was created for that event was held and used for this Naughty Not production. Well, shortly after that production, it was so successful that they took it to the local bases. They went to the Army Depot, the Army Air Depot, which we now know as McClellan. They went to Camp Kohler, which was just east of McClellan. And they also went to Mather. It was so successful and it got a little head of steam that they decided that Sacramento needed to change the Sacramento Community Players and the Sacramento Civic Repertory Theater. And that was how it was born in 1942. With that kind of impetus, then the local air service started putting on annual musicals through the duration of the war effort. This was a 1943 production, At Your Service. And I got a kick out of the notables. Now, Beck, I did see Beck's military, he registered for the draft, although he did not serve in the military. But if we look at the credits, he is designated all sets by Dunbar Beck. But on the next page, I really got a kick out of the fact that Corporal Wayne Thibault was acknowledged as the programs and advertising artists for the production. And when I hear advertising artists, I'm guessing he probably did the layout for this brochure as well. Now I'm just going to run through some different productions that I know Beck was the set designer or art director on, and just comment on some things that I thought were kind of interesting. The theater company actually built their own building in 1949. So what I'm going to show you are some productions in the new, what they called Eaglet Theater, in honor of the old Eagle Theater that was established on Front Street during the Gold Rush. So they did a production of Noah in 1950. And I loved the simplicity of what Beck came up with, rather than, showing the arc, he just showed these ribs of the boat. I thought that was very clever and graphically, very, very strong. One of the funnest things about these presentations is making connections between history and photos. Maybe, like I mentioned, I discover a black and white painting. Then 2 weeks later, I actually discover, oh my gosh, there's a color photo of the painting. Here's another wonderful little connection. Down in the lower right-hand corner, you see this lion. We will see the lion again. This is 1950. Now I'm going to go through some plays. Here's St. Joan, 1953. Beck is also given credit as the costume designer. And it kind of makes sense for St. Joan in that if he really liked the Renaissance, the application of his design sensibilities make a lot of sense. It looks like he liked arches too. You see, once again, he created these, you couldn't do a arched cathedral, but you could do these, arches as symbolic of the period. 1955, he did a more exotic Shakuntala, which I believe is a historical Indian play. Unfortunately, I don't have the best photos of it, but another discovery I made when looking at pieces that have survived and are either in collections, on the right is a photo from the Sacramento room. But then I discovered this at Renaissance Man Antiques. Beck definitely had an affinity for hieroglyphs and decorative arts. And then it was another one of these connections between, I'm looking at the photo from the Sacramento room, and then I'm looking at this, what I believe was a mock-up for frieze art. And I said, oh my gosh, look at the base there from the photo. If not the exact same thing, it's obvious to me that Beck was painting either decorative arts for homes or maybe for the plays at the Civic Theater, but I love making that connection. This I just thought was a kind of a handsome Tudor city or buildings that he had created. I'm sure he was involved with painting them. They look, dare I say, too professional. And then 1957, apparently the Civic Theater would put on just one-act plays at the State Fairgrounds. And this is from 1957. They would do, on an hourly basis or a couple times a day, one scene from Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. And once again, if you look in the lion on the left-hand side, in the body of the caption, it says, in the foreground are Dunbar Beck the lion and Ray Fry Pyramus. So obviously they kept these costumes, and obviously Beck enjoyed wearing that particular one for that play. Time Remembered. 1958 play. I showed you an earlier shot of Beck working on the full-size taxi. If you look closely in the lower left of the tiny little set he had constructed, there is the taxi. Here's a cover from 1963 for Edibus Rex. And once again, I just love that this particular piece of art, on the back of it, it's, I believe, a fabric. It has noted Edibus Rex. So I can say with a certain amount of confidence that this design probably was featured in this play. I do not know how. It looks like the set is pretty simple, but once again, a fun connection. And then this was a real surprise. I had never really thought of Beck as a graphic designer, but in the 35th annual anniversary album of the Civic, and I always like to, at some points at the Sacramento Civic Repertory Theater, Beck had done a bunch of branding logos for them through the years. And this was a half page in that album, just kind of explaining how the logos evolved and how they did separate branding for the Children's Theater, and there was a Harlequin Theater. So, just as a graphic designer, I could relate to that. And of course, they were tying all back into that Gold Rush original theater or Eagle Theater on Front Street in Sacramento. Another area of Beck expertise that I did not know until recently was his involvement in mid-century modern buildings. Once again, through his relationship with the Bee and with Eleanor. He worked on multiple Bee buildings, including the building at Q and 21st. And this is just very poignant to be working on this presentation at this point, because many of you will know the Bee has, company has been sold. And the future of the actual original 1952 building is unknown. The property is now owned by a company out of Irvine, California. No designs have been put forth yet, but it'll be interesting to see, do they embrace the building? Is there some sort of adaptive reuse? There are very large warehouses to the east side of the 3-story or 4-story mid-century modern offices. So it just not as a lot known what is going to happen, but it's kind of interesting to just take a quick snapshot of its history and how it looked when it first opened in 1952. Here's an ad from August of 52, and once again, the Bee acknowledged Beck a lot, and they acknowledged him for working with a engineering firm, Lockwood Green, out of New York City, to develop the Bee building. And this was a big deal for the Bee because they were moving out of their 7th Street location, which was a vintage building, and they tried to make the new building as efficient and as modern, both inside and out, as well as in terms of functionality, as possible. This is a terrific supplement that also was shared with me late in the project, and I was thrilled to get because I had not seen it when I was searching the Bee online through the Sacramento Public Library, and not sure if special supplements made it into that what's called news bank service. But I was thrilled to see this, both aesthetically as well as the special supplement that ran about 50 pages, had great shots of all the different locations and departments in the building. And I'm just going to run through a few. This is the original lobby. I love the, I'm assuming, terrazzo floor. Beck is given a lot of credit for the finishes, interior. I really think Beck, to call Beck an architect, you can't call him an architect because he wasn't certified as such. But I think he was influential, as I'd almost call him like the art director of the building, both inside and out. I'm sure he sat in all the development meetings. So it's a little hard to tease out, how he worked, but his influence is definitely there. Here's a great shot of the newsroom. I will say that Beck, in some of the information I discovered, there was some controversy in some of the things he did with the building. One was he apparently developed a custom desk that there was a special order. And when they arrived, the sense was that they're too small. And one of the conjectures was that Beck was not a tall person, and that the sizing of them just may have not been appropriate. And I'm looking at the two gentlemen on the left in the newsroom, and well, gosh, there might be some truth to that. One last photo I wanted to share because it showed it also what struck me, and this is more of a historical perspective. It appears all of the individuals in the newsroom are men, and then I saw the business office, and I think everyone are women. So that was just kind of a little telling of the period. There's some great pictures of the building original. This is would be looking southeast from the corner. The 3rd floor actually had a balcony that wrapped the two sides. And just inside the balcony area was where there was a lounge, a cafeteria, So individuals could actually come out on that balcony and look towards downtown, towards the Capitol. Here's a evening shot, I believe at opening, allowing the public to come in and have a look. And then the Bee in Sacramento was growing fast and furious during the 50s. So the Bee just kept, what they thought they had, a state-of-the-art building for 10, 15 years. They started making changes to the building within the first 5 years. And one of the first big additions was that they were adjacent to the old 7th Street plant and offices for the Bee was the KFBK building, and they decided they wanted to move all operations to one central location. So sadly, this wonderful streamlined modern building that was built only in the mid-30s was going to be torn down, and the operations, if you look at the illustration above, you could see a dotted line. They was actually going to add on to the roof of that section of the new building and put KFBK there, and then put the radio tower on top, right adjacent to the broadcast center. I will also like to mention, because as I do my research, I find little cross-pollination stories. As an Art Deco person, it just makes me sad that the KFBK building came down. It didn't survive. But there was also 2 interesting facts I found out about it. And the Sacramento Bee acknowledged Eleanor McClatchy once again as the person who personally selected both the architect, and more importantly, if you look on the left side, there's some areas or bands that look like they have bas reliefs underneath the 3 and above the 3 vertical windows. It turns out, of all things, that the Bee mentions in an article that Eleanor McClatchy selected Ralph Stackpole, the notable San Francisco architect that did the fountain in Cesar Chavez Plaza, did the Swanson statue in the William Land Park, as well as a WPA mural at City College, that this was Beck's other 4th important hand-carved bas relief. I don't think it was saved. I think the building was just knocked down, but for me, as kind of a historian and an art appreciation person, it kind of makes me sad that that happened, but it kind of acknowledges to me once again that Eleanor really did enjoy arts, and she enjoyed engaging artists. I will also mention this KFBK building was designed by another notable Sacramentan, Harry Devine Sr. And those churches I showed, the Rose Chapel and Holy Spirit Church, those were also designed by Harry Devine Sr. Another building Beck was involved in the mid 50s was what was called the Beehive. It was a small mid-century modern building. On the left was a small auditorium, and it was developed specifically to do home economic and cooking instruction programming for the Bee, for McClatchy Broadcasting, and it was the first building that they built, beyond the main building on the corner before they started putting up large production facilities to the east. Beck is given credit for pretty much designing this building. It had a, interesting slant roof. The building is still there today. It is owned by the same development company that bought the super block adjacent or across the street. And I'm hoping that this building is saved. It has, unfortunately, some issues. I think seeing even what I think is probably a model is it looked like the front of the building actually had some nice wood treatment that is no longer there. There was obviously plantings there in front. And then most significantly, the building had a very attractive courtyard that you can see. And unfortunately, because of space, the courtyard was covered up at some point. Here's another shot of the building from the same angle, but at street level. But this is the picture I enjoy. It's actually showing visitors, open house day, and they're on the patio, and you can see the grid of the roof, and it just looks like a very attractive space. And once again, Beck was noted in the article that he constructed and furnished throughout the building in a contemporary style. Another building that Beck was involved with, and pretty much all of the buildings associated with the Repertory Theater. The first theater was built in 1949. The theater is actually there. And then they kept adding additions on. This was the third edition in 1954, where Beck basically did this international style, mid-century style loggia and a ticket office to the right, and pretty attractive. This was another wonderful discovery at the Sacramento Room. They actually had a 14th season brochure, and I love, obviously, and I imagine this was back, you probably got out there as the art director and, had either theater or patrons come and do a little photo shoot. And I just thought that was great. I love the period vehicle. And then of course, up in the upper left corner is the logo created by Beck. Here's what it looked like in color. I think probably later years, like the 60s. And then with the whole evolving story of the Bee buildings at Q and 21st, I was contacted by an architecture historian doing a documentation of the Bee buildings. And he was asking me, he said, I understand or believe that Beck was involved with buildings at the Civic Theater. I confirmed that. And he said, well, are any of them standing? And I said, I believe they are all standing. Unfortunately, through time and progress, they're all now buried under stucco and new facades. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of example of that. I'm going to show you what you're looking at from the 50s and 60s, what it looks like today. And I'm going to show you now right where the ticket office used to be. It's right there. So obviously it has changed dramatically, and you can't really identify where the old begins, or it's just not clear. And I was kind of so intrigued by the problem, I went ahead and did this schematic of basically the steps of how the facility was developed. And to my knowledge, Beck was involved in the original theater, the educational building, the loggia, and the original placement of the music circus tent. Another fun story that fell out of this is the Prize Fighter series. Beck did a very consequential series of paintings around prize fighting and the history of prize fighting. The canvases were on the larger size, 30 by 24 inches typically. And there's been great conjecture of where the inspiration came from these paintings. I'm just going to put forth my own theory. It's just a theory, but that is pictured here is Max Baer. And some of you may know Max Baer before World War II, or even up through the 1960s, was very much a Sacramento hero, because in 1934, he won the world heavyweight championship in New York City by beating Primo Carnera. And he did that from California. And Primo Carnera was actually an Italian. What's also notable about Max Baer's victory was at that fight was Eleanor McClatchy. And if you look at the lower portion, it It says, Eleanor McClatchy describes Max Bear as dancing satyr, coolly annoying the big giant. Apparently Primo was like 260 pounds, which is at the time was just a huge fighter. So I think that there was this kind of cross-pollination, because later on, Eleanor and the Bee kind of embraced Max Bear, and his brother, I also know his brother was also a successful prize fighter, Buddy Bear, embraced him, and he became almost kind of a figure at KFBK, including having his own radio talk show in the early 50s, the Max Bear Show. So now I'm going to share just a couple of studies, pencil drawings that actually are from the Crocker Art Museum. Once again, just showing this ongoing effort of doing development, learning his anatomy. I don't think Beck ever got tired of doing human studies. Here's a detail. I love the definition of the back muscles. And then I wasn't really able, as I mentioned, I wanted to give attribution. I had really a hard time finding available paintings, but one I was very happy. I couldn't find any in California, at least that were acknowledged to be owned publicly. But I was pleased to find this one called Shadowboxing. And of all things, it was at the Nevada Museum of Art in Reno. And excuse me, I think I said that the paintings were 30 by 24 there. I think most of them were actually 30 by 40 inches. And then one of the more spectacular paintings of the series was The Big Fight. And this is an interesting painting because it is all over the internet, Twitter. It's been shared a lot. It's a very beautiful painting in the sense that it reminds me of early 19th century painters like George Bellows. And I would love to be able to see all the paint. I think there's up to like a dozen that I've identified either in black and white or in color. But I'd love to just see the entire series, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to do that. I'm running along on time, so I'm going to just briefly acknowledge that Beck also did a terrific job of doing early preliminary drawings for what Old Sac could be. And I'm just going to show you a couple drawings, but once again, the Sacramento Bee, and I think also as part of Eleanor's passion, because she was passionate about Sacramento history, going back through her father's interest and also acknowledging her grandfather, James McClatchy, that Old Sac was a place that was important and should be saved. So just a couple of drawings that these drawings also came out as supplements that would have been shown in the Sacramento Bee. Here's a shot he did of how he envisioned Old Sac. And I had some kind of fun. I did kind of a Google Earth thing. And here's the same block. Of course, you'll recognize it as K and Front Street. Once again, just kind of the control of when Beck did pencil drawings, they were very controlled, very disciplined, almost like an architectural renderer. And here's another shot. And then the last one, which I just love, and it's kind of splotchy because it's on newsprint, but envisioning the river. This is looking north towards the tower. He foresaw another bridge matching the tower, and lo and behold, here in the new millennia, it looks like we are going to have a new bridge crossing from the rail yards. It looks like Beck envisioned, and I'm sure he visited Paris, kind of an elevated path that could be flooded along. Rather than the Seine, it would be the American River. And then this last group of photos has just been added to my presentation in the last week. and I'm just thrilled to be able to share it with you because it's a nice kind of acknowledgement of Beck's versatility and also Eleanor McClatchy's passion for art and a project that they worked on together. So I'd like to share with you images from La Casa de Leonora. And my capper on this is it's a decorative arts treasure, and I truly, these few photos that I had the privilege to see, I believe that's the case. This little detail, intrigued me. You'll see more details such as this is La Quinta de los Dos Fuentes. Fuentes being fountains, like the home of the two fountains. At least that's how I interpret it, which is kind of lovely. This is, as I understand it, is the dining room ceiling. It shows the love that Eleanor had, I think, for Spanish and Moorish. I know Eleanor traveled abroad, both before and after she started as president at McClatchy newspapers. So it looks like over the years, she brought the things she discovered in the world back to Sacramento and did it in a very beautiful way. I will also mention that I love this kind of the early Spanish revival art and architecture of California. So this really speaks to me. But the other thing is the little detail I showed you, the frieze that runs all the way around the ceiling is hand painted by Beck. And it's little vignettes of Sacramento and California history. This is another, when I first saw the photo, I thought it might be the medallion center of the dining room. As I understand it, it is actually the medallion center of a bedroom. Now, a couple shots of the frieze. You can see La Quinta, and then on the left, another, just a wonderful little personalization. Esta es La Casa de Leonora. And then the date, 1940. It's not clear to me if this was painted in 1940, but I like that it's tied to it because, as I understand it, the house was built in that year. Around the circumference of the dining room on this frieze have to be at least 50 or 60 vignettes. And they are all notable. In this case, we're talking again about the Eagle Theater on Front Street, established in 1849. To the right, an acknowledgement of James McClatchy. I believe that's when he came to California, 1848. On the left, acknowledging California's admission to the Union as a state. And just three more. The Transcontinental Railroad, 1869, the Pony Express, 1860. And then, although it's a little hard to see, but I just love the first press illustrated of the Bee, which I believe the Bee was established in 1857. And then another that knocked my socks off. The color of this is just beautiful. This is, I understand, a ceiling in a portico on the property. This is being Eleanor's house. And I just think it's just lovely and whimsical, and the colors are just terrific. The only thing when I looked at it, I said, gosh, I want to be able to get underneath every one of those zodiac symbols and take a photo so I can really appreciate them. But then I realized, well, I think of some of them, I think it's sharp enough, I can at least rotate a few of them and share them. And so here's Leo the lion. I like the way Beck integrated the classic simple signature or symbol of the zodiac. You can see it on the Leo's tail. The Gemini twins. And then this reminds me of someone else we've seen, Virgo, the goddess of harvest. This reminds me of the floating female from his World's Fair mural. Getting back to the ongoing discovery and finding things in color. I had understood that potentially there were still some Beck paintings in Eleanor McClatchy's house, and I was thrilled to see that verified. And I'm going to, these will be the last two images. Of all things, I had no idea that Eleanor McClatchy owned the painting Pastoral that I showed you in that news clip from 1931. And I was just delighted to see it in color. Two things that struck me immediately, that if Beck hadn't been so challenged probably by the Depression, I think he's showing me artistic style that I see in other artists of the period, like a Maynard Dixon or almost a Diego Rivera, and talking about more of a working class approach to theme. And I think it's just a terrific painting. I love the detailing on the father, the worker, and well, I was just surprised and delighted to see it. This painting I had never only seen in black and white. It was used in a couple consequential biographies of McClatchy Company. What's interesting to me about the painting is that it has been described as an idealized painting of Eleanor. When I looked at it, I could see the point of the writer, but then I saw this photo just recently, had the opportunity to see at the Center for Sacramento History. And this is Eleanor as a young woman. And I was looking at it and I said, boy, Beck did capture a quality of Eleanor. And I think it's a very beautiful, getting back to Beck's portrait, very beautiful and respectful approach in his portraiture. And I just think it's wonderful to see it, to know that Beck had done this painting for his very dear friend, and just great to see. So I'd just like to take a moment to say that Beck truly was a Renaissance master. It's wonderful that he was a part of Poverty Ridge for so many years. And I also kind of fun just like to pull together images and see how they relate to each other. So I just thought it would be kind of fun to think of Beck once again, that, here he did costume design and he did preservation and painting. He did architecture, even moving into the modern era of mid-century modern. And finally, he did set design. And, if these different images aren't a testament to his Renaissance qualities, it's a pretty powerful statement. My last photo, and I'm just thrilled that the Crocker has it, is actually a self-portrait of Beck by him. And it just seemed like a very apropos to finish with his own image. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight to go through this interesting review of Dunbar Beck and the influences and importance of his patron and their friendship together, Eleanor and Dunbar Beck. So thank you. I have two other things I want to mention, Mary Ellen. The first is Sacramento Art Deco Society. We are a nonprofit. Typically, we ask donations at live presentations, but we do have a wonderful website, and we have a donations tab on our website. So if you feel compelled, please take a visit to sacartdeco.org and donate. And then the last is a shout out, Mary Ellen, to my next and final lecture for the fall of 2021. I'm going to do a lecture on Sergeant C. Johnson, who was a WPA artist. a significant artist, and the subtitle is Sculpting Beauty on the West Coast During the Harlem Renaissance. Beck, Freudian slip, Sergeant Johnson was considered part of the Harlem Renaissance, even though he lived and worked predominantly on the West Coast, but he participated in many art competitions in New York City. And Beck did some terrific art and WPA projects in San Francisco. So thank you again, and I give it back to you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We much appreciated the in-depth work that you put on this tremendous amount of research. We only had one question in the chat so far, and that was the house that Adair was taking all the photos of the friezes. Was that at the U Street house?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great. And it is a little late. What I'm going to do, if it's all right with you, is I'm going to pause the recording, but if anybody wants to stay and ask questions, I'm willing to stay as long as Bruce is.
Okay.
So are there any closing remarks you'd like to do before I actually stop the recording?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
But
thank you.